electronic device and you're in here, mute it to avoid feedback. We'll actually just switch it off. I'm quite happy with that. Good, good, good. Any remote participants, keep your camera and microphone off unless you wish to speak. And you put your yellow hand up and I call you. Ideally, don't use the camera facility as this can affect the quality of the meeting. Please advise that the meeting may be recorded and data collected during the recording of the meeting will be retained in accordance with the Council's data retention policy. The recording of the meeting may be added to the Council's website. Members accessing the meeting remotely should use their SBC or KCC laptop to participate virtually. If you join using the link on the website or on a mobile and tablet device, it is not always possible to identify you and you may not be recorded as in remote attendance. So welcome members, and we also, members in the chamber and remotely, I can't see because I've got these on. We've also got here Charlotte Hudson, Head of Housing and Community Services, Glyn Pritchard, Private Sector Housing Manager, Roxanne Shepherds, welcome, a Housing Options Manager, Democratic Services, Billy Attaway. The emergency procedure is noted in your papers. Yep. If anyone needs help, let me know now. Otherwise, just follow me out of the room. We're not expecting a drill. Are there any apologies for absence? So far, we've got Angie Vowles, who's been substituted by Tony Winkless, and Councillor Chapman, who is substituted by Councillor Richard Palmer. Anyone else? Hi, Peter. Traffic bad? Oh, okay. Anybody else? Then I think probably we're all here. Yeah, okay, right. Then item 3. Item 1, item 2, item 3, declaration of interest. Has anybody got any declaration of interest? Councillor Martin?
Pecuniary interest, item 6, I will leave the room.
Okay. No one else? Right. Minutes of the meeting held on the 4th of July 2023, numbers 170 to 177. Are you happy that I sign these as a correct record? Agreed. Good. Right then, Part B reports for decision. Item 5, 4 decisions plan. Charlotte.
As you will see from the agenda pack, the forward decision plan is currently empty. However, since publication, we have been advised that, as I reported at a previous meeting, that unfortunately we had a failed tender for the nightly let accommodation. But as part of our financial regulations, we do need to officially put a waiver in place for that. And therefore, at the next meeting, the waiver decision will be brought forward for the committee to consider.
Thank you very much. Just for info, a lot of the things that we're doing as a committee, the things which come under us, are we have policies which we review now and again. Well, now and again after so many years. Some of them are tweaked in between because of legislation changes that we haven't actually got a choice about changing the policy on. And that is all delegated down to officers. So it is a case of every so many years you review a policy, and if anything comes up, we aren't supposed to be having these committees for information items, but if need be, we will manage to get round that. Having said all that, we will not be holding meetings for the sake of holding meetings. If there is nothing for you to decide on, then we will not be having a meeting, but you will be told well in advance. I think that's fair. Item 6 then, housing assistance policy review. Thanks, Ben. And also item 7, I'm going to say this for both of them. If you've got questions, it's best if the officers can go through their flow, and then we take questions at the end, because 9 times out of 10 they'll have answered your question if you let them get to the end anyway. Okay, so over to is it Charlotte, Housing Assistance Policy Review? Yep.
Excellent. Thank you, Chair. So within this report, as Councillor Harrison just said, that policies get updated fairly regularly. But every now and again, we feel it's good to sort of have a bit more of a substantive review, just to make sure that, again, members of the committee are cited on that information, but also that it does meet all current legislation and is best for our residents. So the housing assistance policy is one of those such policies, and it was last brought to Cabinet in May 2018. You can rest assured that minor amendments have taken place to sort of maximise the use of that grant to our residents and those most in need, and delegations were provided at that time. A copy of the most up-to-date policy is linked into the strategy. What we're really looking for today, before I pass over to Glyn, who deals with this policy on a day-to-day basis, is a small working group to work with us as officers to review the policy and to bring forward recommendations, well, whether we keep the policy the same or make any amendments and recommendations. We've also included in the report just a bit of an overview of the sort of the spend last year, which kind of reflects the sort of level of grant going out towards our residents that this policy influences and decides who's eligible to go forward. I'll say to you, Glyn.
Yeah, so the last few years, and I have tweaked it a few times, and it's been agreed by delegation. And we can see from the figures that we've managed to cut down on means testing and things like that, which is a long, laborious task, and we've got to gather a lot of information and financial information. So what we did at that time was we looked at what the main grants were, what they covered, and then set a level that we wouldn't bother doing any means tests. So that gets majority of people through. So you can see from the figures that, that has worked, because we very rarely do means testing now on grants. So it's things like that we want to look at to see if it's still fit for purpose, and whether there's anything that I may not have considered that residents may have, discussed with yourselves, or any ideas that you can come up with that's within the parameters of the legislation. So to get a working group to think about it instead of me having to go through everything and miss things, it's worth getting an input from yourselves to see if there is anything or if they want to be changes. Funding, some of it is through council funds that have been recycled. So there is some funds there that are not necessarily new. They are only ones that are recycled under a couple of the grants, loans and things for properties, where residents can get some help for urgent sort of works. But the disabled grant side, you can see from that, we get about 2.9 million a year, and we contribute to KCC's fund, the social fund, and they do hoists, lifts and various other bits and bobs. And they run their sort of handy person service as well, that provides handrails and other things from the funding that we give. If we didn't give them that money, we would have to do it ourselves. So it's a benefit to both parties, and that's what we want to look at, to keep that funding and see if there's anything else. We use some of the money to fund OT specifically, to process the grants. We've been doing that for a few years. Otherwise, we end up with, we still do get KCC, occupational therapists do other work for us, but we do have a dedicated one that is specifically that we can utilise for other things as well within the remit of the disabled side of things. And we can utilise them for housing options and to do assessments if need be for housing on that front for needs. So I think the main thing we're looking for is volunteers and to consider the reference for the review. That's in the policy.
Okay, thanks, Glenn. Okay, this is a fantastic service, in my opinion, which really, really makes a difference to our residents. I've known residents that have had the service, and it really makes a difference. I did put a note round, as you might remember. 3 people have said, Councillor Watson, Councillor Chris Palmer, Councillor Anne Kavanagh have said they would love to go on a working party group. Is there anyone else that would like to? Hannah would like to sit on it. Are you okay, Peter? If you're not on it, don't mean to say you can't chip in, but it means that they can focus. And it's people who are interested. Well, that sounds like you're not, but you know what I mean. So that makes 4. We're all happy with that. Good. And then how are we going to do the terms of reference?
So in 2.9 of the report, we've put some proposals down. So if I just read them out quickly. So to consider if the policy is providing the right assistance to households in the borough, to consider if the financial thresholds and mean tests are at the appropriate levels, to consider if the policy is reaching the right resident in the borough, and to ensure the policy can be resourced both in terms of funding availability, but also officer resource, which we can't utilise the Better Care Fund to do that side of it. So that was kind of, from an officer perspective, the 4 proposals, but obviously if there's additional elements in there, we can incorporate that as part of the review too.
Okay, so those terms of reference here, I suppose number 1, you're happy with those. Number 2, is there anything else you think, oh no, I think we should look at that? Alistair?
Just wondering whether there's need to have reference to sort of timeframes, actually being a bit more specific about in terms of the assistance. I appreciate there's a lot of different grants covered here, but just whether that needs to be something that to have targets to work towards in terms of how quickly these sort of improvements can be put in. And the other one was about the how much of the funds are recycled, and whether there's ways of improving that, and if that's something that needs to be looked at, which may already be being done, but just yeah.
Okay, well, in terms of the recycled, can you explain that bit, and then of course answer the question? Because what I'm thinking is, well, since I've been involved, if I give you, I don't know, I give you 30 grand to do a lot more now, a wet room, and then you move 2 years later, you have to pay it back. Is that what we call recycling?
Yeah, you pay a proportion of it back. Anything over 5,000 but under 10,000. So basically 15,000, sorry. So you've got a 10,000 maximum of a grant that you'd have to pay back. So if you had a maximum grant of 30,000 or potentially more, if there was discretionary added, you would only ever pay back 10,000. But that can be, there's various clauses that they can look at and put forward as to reasoning. So officer decision will decide whether it's reasonable or not, given the financial circumstances and the criteria that we've got to look at, whether they're moving or whether anything like that. So we can actually waive that if need be. But the money that's paid back to the council is put back into a capital pot. And at the moment, we don't necessarily need to touch that, because since 2016, we've had increased funding. And where we had COVID and lockdown, that basically the take up reduced almost 50%, because more people in their properties, and builders couldn't get out and deal with it. So we're now getting back up to pre-COVID levels with work. And the committed this year was about, well, last year was about 3 million. So we're getting there. So everything that's put in a reserve, if we went over that amount of money, we would then use that money before we get another allocation from government in the year. Otherwise, we would end up back on a waiting list or the council would have to find money to fund, because it is a statutory obligation to provide these grants and fund the grants a certain way. So having that reserve is a good thing that is spent, and it is ring fenced, or it was last time I checked with finance, ring fenced for disabled adaptations.
So would the max of 10k be something which the working group could actually look at, or is that that's set by the government? And also, would it be realistic for them to look at a time, or for them to say, actually, we think you should put a time frame on this? I think it's a good idea if you can do it.
If you're looking at timeframes, what, for approving grants or getting work done? If you're approving, there's a statutory timeframe of 6 months from the date of application that we've got to do that, and we're well within that approval. The problem you then have is getting the work done, which is not necessarily by the council. It can be by builders, it can be by clients, and we will process that as quickly as it can. To get to the grant process, it's not necessarily the council that affects that, because they've got to be referred for by occupational therapists and needs. So all those assessments have to be done before they can come to us. So yeah, we want to try and speed it up as quick as we can. So by cutting down the paperwork, i.e. means testing, then yes, we can get to that process a lot quicker. So any way we can find to cut down a bureaucracy, if there is anything, that's what we would do. But to say and put a time limit on it is not necessarily straightforward, because there's other factors that kick in, and we do have clients that withhold the time. We've got one at the moment that's been on hold for a long time because the client's in and out of hospital and things like that, and they don't want the work done until they're in hospital again. So we try and speed things up. Smaller works, we've already cut that down by having a restricted grant of £7,000 to do any sort of works that we can fit in quickly. So we have got other means of doing some of the disabled grants for minor sort of work through our stay put agency. So things like that already have been considered. But the large grants, especially if it's going to be for children, can take a long time. It's not straightforward, and we don't necessarily hold it up, because every grant has, from the date of approval, 12 months to complete. And we can't force them to complete it any earlier than 12 months. So there's certain time limits that you cannot alter.
For the terms of reference, I know it is spoken about later in section 6, the implications bit, but there hasn't been a community impact or equality impact assessment on this policy. By the looks of things, this policy is something that people with disabilities would really need to be able to access. Not all disabilities are around mobility. Some are about your ability to understand things. And so I think the terms of reference should also include a bit about making sure that this policy is actually accessible to everybody that may benefit from applying for it, including people that speak different languages or have severe learning difficulties that aren't part of sort of like sheltered accommodations and stuff.
The policy is open to everybody, and they can apply from any point. We do sort of education with hospitals, doctors. We've done that. We've had Staying Put, which is the home improvement agency, do go out and they do give talks to Age Concern and various other bodies as well across the board. It is something that we get any, we can't publish everything or produce everything in every language, but we haven't had an issue with the language barriers in any areas. And we do cover other things from dementia to all sorts. It's not just physical disabilities. There are other things that are considered, which is what we put in the discretionary grants for on it. For certain things, the grant limits what we can provide. It's access to facilities is the mandatory grant. We've come in with discretionary grants, which give access to other people to gain access to things. So yeah, if there's any new guidance, we will follow that as far as we can.
Thanks, Glenn. Now, Charlotte's going to come back on that, but we were also on the BBC. I just thought I'd mention that. The Stay Put scheme, we were on the BBC. And one of the people that they were helping actually lived around the corner from me. was really, you know, in terms of showing people what the system does, what the scheme does, it was really fantastic. That was a very good programme, that wasn't it? It was a series of following different environmental health officers in different councils across the country. And we had Glyn and we had Sue. Yeah, very good that was, Charlotte.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify something on the equality and diversity bit, that the comment in here wasn't saying that we haven't got one on the current policy. It's just that it would a revised one would need to be done with any changes to the policy in line, obviously, with our policy adoption. So it's not that we haven't had regard to it previously. It's just saying, because obviously this was just about the policy review, this document, that we would refresh that and make sure all those things that Glyn said and things that maybe we haven't considered also form a part of that, because obviously needs change and awareness changes over time.
Okay, then. So we've got 2 recommendations with the additions that we've already done. All those in favour? Just a minute. I wasn't ignoring her. I didn't see it. Okay, we're all agreed with that then. So the next step is Charlotte, for you stroke Glyn to gather the 4 people together, either online or in person, and get going. Now, this will be a time and a day to suit. Yep. Good. So good luck, everyone. And yeah, I can't be on everything. It's not that I'm not interested. I can't do everything, because I was going to, oh, I could do that. No, I can't. Right. So the next item is item 7, temporary accommodation. Same as the last one. Any questions at the end? We have, I know the officers have had the press on about temporary accommodation. I have also had the press write to me about temporary accommodation. Oh no, you've gone up, and we've put in an FOI. I said, well, if you'd have gone on the Swell website, it's coming to the committee on Tuesday night. You could have read that. Anyway, I point them in the direction of reading this report, which gives all the information and says exactly what the position is and what the officers are trying to do to help it, and that all members are aware of this, because it's, you know, officers keep telling us what the position is. Nothing's secret. Obviously, if you can think of something better that we haven't, then we'd welcome it. So over to you, Roxanne.
I'll slightly introduce the
Charlotte,
paper.
sorry.
No, that's okay. And then obviously Roxanne is the expert, so she can go into all the details and things like that. So we brought this paper towards the committee because obviously temporary accommodation in itself does cost us a sizable amount of the council budget. And as the paper sets out, there are statutory responsibilities and certain circumstances where we have to provide that temporary accommodation. So there isn't a choice for those people that meet the criteria and are eligible and in priority need to receive that accommodation. So over the last few years, we've seen an increase, as have all local authorities, I would say, across the country in temporary accommodation, but equally the costs have gone up considerably as well. This paper basically sets out, and it's an opportunity for you to sort of ask us questions about what we are currently doing, how we are managing the budget, how we are mitigating costs. And in the appendices in particular, we've set out a range of the options that we have provided. I think it's fair to say those options have been integrated into the team on top of a lot of busy casework that they have all been doing. And I think we're both very proud of the commitment and the work that the team have done. There's a whole range of things. I say our nightly let providers have put costs up and last year in year, so we couldn't budget for those costs. We weren't anticipating them. And I think that probably does reflect that year-end overspend position that we had. I think it's also important to note that obviously the costs of providing the accommodation and the housing benefit that we can recoup obviously clearly don't align. And actually, it's probably a worse situation than that, because the LHA rate, we can only claim up to 90% rather than the full LHA rate, which again puts an additional burden on the council going forward. I'm not going to go into huge amounts of detail because I think the report covers obviously some of the data that we provided and an outline of all the things that we've done. I think it is important to note, though, that it has been a corporate risk at the council for a number of years. We have done a number of actions to continue to mitigate and manage that situation as we go forward. As you're all aware, the cost of living crisis is having an impact, and there's always a bit of a lag between when people may have financial difficulties to actually becoming homeless and that whole process as well. And increasingly, the private rented sector is becoming not a housing option anymore, and there are considerable difficulties in accessing that. And I probably don't also need to tell you that the delivery of affordable housing does not keep pace with the need and the levels of people on the housing register versus the completions each year and the voids that become available. So I don't know if Rox wants to add anything in terms of your real life experiences every day.
I just think probably one of the biggest things you've mentioned is that it's the cost of the in the private rented sector. And I always use the example of a 2-bed property in Jefferson Road, probably about a year ago, say a rent of about 800. We had one a few weeks back, it's £1,400, and it's people cannot afford, to pay those sorts of levels in rent. So I think that's probably the most significant problems that we have. We have an awful lot of domestic abuse, people fleeing, not just sort of families, but there's gang crime we're now seeing. I don't really know what to say. I try not to be like a picture of sort of gloom, but it is hard, and it's sort of getting harder and getting worse. But the team are so committed. I really can't praise them enough. They're really committed to doing whatever they can to sort of reduce this spend, because in terms if we can keep people in their homes or they can avoid coming into temporary accommodation, it really is a much better option, just harder to achieve at the moment.
I was going to say that the staff have, yes, they're dealing with homeless and people in need of temporary accommodation, but they also spend a fair bit of time trying to keep you in your own home, which is what Rox has just alluded to. That ain't easy. But obviously, I was going to say it's cheaper for us if they can do that, because we then haven't got to find somewhere else. In terms of the budget, what we can't do, if you turn up and you fit the criteria, because the government does lay down all this criteria of but you might be homeless, but we don't need to deal with you. What we can't say is well, we've run out of budget, so we're stopping here. We cannot do that. We have to find the money somewhere. There are people in some councils, there are some councils where 300 families a day are turning up looking for temporary accommodation. They fit the criteria. They need temporary accommodation. 300 a day. No wonder everybody's going over budget. You can't just say, well, sorry, we run out of money, sort yourself out, because we have a responsibility. Tony had a question.
Thank you, Chair. It's not actually a committee I actually sit on, I'm subbing, but I'm going to ask this question. I think you probably partly touched on it, Chair. How are we getting on by moving the rough sleepers, which some are generally homeless. I know some aren't. I know it was an issue that Councillor Ben Martin was very heavily involved in the last administration. How are we getting on? Because I'm going to quote City Morn High Street. I see it nearly every day. a lot of rough sleepers in the doorways. So how are we getting on with removing or finding these rough sleepers accommodation? Thank you.
Yeah, if I sort of come in on that, so as a council, we receive funding from DLUC for our rough sleeping service. So we are currently in the second year of a 3-year funding round to receive that. So the team have done an incredible amount of work to, and their caseload is actually quite high. I think it's a constant stream of new to the street rough sleepers, and a lot of work is done, and a lot of our rough sleepers are housed. Clearly, some of them aren't housed and have been housed potentially, and maybe have not sustained that accommodation. But we are aware of some issues in Sittingbourne High Street. A couple of weeks ago, I held a meeting with our rough sleeper team, our community safety team, and the local police to look at what interventions can be done, and a package of support in terms of the support package from our rough sleeper team, who obviously do outreach work and work with them to deal with issues, coupled with some clear boundaries from the community safety team and the police team around expectations about behaviours and the consequences of that. So some community protection warnings were issued around that. So I think rough sleeping is really difficult because it's a balancing act of carrot and stick, really, because some people don't want to accept the help or aren't in a position to be able to accept that help. But equally, our residents need to be able to feel safe in the high streets and things like that. So it is a multi-agency response. It's not a quick problem. People don't often become entrenched rough sleepers overnight, and there is a multitude of issues that need to be tackled, and some of them, have some very long-term trauma that needs to be supported as well. So it's really balancing out the needs of everyone and trying to, it's a fine line that we have to take. But I think we're aware of the issues, and say a multi-agency response is in process, and we're constantly looking at ways to improve our support to rough sleepers. In fact, Rox and I were on a meeting today with Health around some additional work that we potentially can do and improve long-term processes in that as well. So it's an evolving agenda.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I know, Roxanne, you were talking about the amount of people that are in the private rental sector that are struggling at the moment. It's certainly something that's reflected in my casework as a councillor. I think when I first was elected, it was mainly to do with like bins and potholes and that. And now it's lots and lots of people ringing desperate because they can't afford to stay in their rental properties. Apologies if this is a question, I'm new to this committee, so I'm new to how it works, but do the council work with estate agencies and the private sector landlords to look at ways of empowering residents to be able to keep themselves in their houses? Is that's just from kind of personal experience of renting and getting an email saying, your rent's going up, but not following that with any kind of ways of, if you can't afford that, this is how you help. Is there a way that we can talk to private landlords and private estate agencies just to make sure that information is getting through to their tenants?
Yes, is the simple.
I was going to say, as apart from Rox answering that, one of the on the appendix, I just think there's a whole series of work which staff are doing in terms of prevention. I've got a couple of questions on that as well, on the prevention, improving our systems and actually working in partnership, moving on, lobbying. There's several pages here. It isn't that our staff aren't doing enough. By Christ, I'm not sure what else they can do. Sorry, Rox, I just sort of mention that.
Thank you. Yeah, so as Angela says, we have a team, the prevention team, that will work with households that contact us with these sorts of difficulties. Yeah, we regularly will, so if there's a rent increase, we'll make sure that the landlord has done it lawfully. We will try and negotiate, I mean, at some stage, we do think this is going to crash because people cannot afford those sorts of rents. So we're forever talking to landlords, estate agents, and saying, you know, if you can't keep this tenant in, do you really think you're going to get another tenant? So lots of negotiation goes on. We have a lot of Section 21 eviction notices that are served, and again, it's that same process. We will always, the first point of call up after we've checked whether the notice is valid is we will be on the phone talking to landlords and agents, negotiating. As well as that, we'll be looking at affordability. We'll be looking at people's incomes, making sure they're getting, you know, what they're entitled to. Looking at debt, whether or not that could be minimalised. Our focus is very much on keeping people in those homes for, you know, as long as we can.
Yeah, and one of my questions, because there does seem to be a misunderstanding amongst some people out there. If I turn up, I'm homeless. I've been chucked out of my property with my family. You've agreed that I fit the criteria. What the council doesn't have is a list of houses that they keep in the back pocket and say, oh yeah, oh, we can put you in there. I might be wrong, but this is how I think. I think what if I'm accepted, then the staff then have to ring round different landlords to see if they can then find me a property, a property that I can live in temporarily. And sometimes they can't, and I have to go into a B&B or a travel lodge. Or could you just run through that, Rox? Because there does seem to be a misunderstanding out there. And as I say, we are lucky. We only have maybe 20 or 30 a day, whereas, you know, if you're in London, where do you suddenly find 300 properties to put these families in? So there does seem to be people who think you've got them in the back pocket, and you go through your list and say, oh, you can go there. Oh, I don't like you, so I'm not no, I ain't got anything because I don't like you. But oh, you could go in that one there. There does seem to be that out there.
I think certainly from the public's point of view, every day we have to manage those expectations, because I think people and friends of mine as well have said to me that, you know, well, if I can't afford to pay my mortgage or my rent, you know, at least I know I've got children, I can come into the council. Oh, if only it was sort of a nice, smooth transaction. It's a question of, you know, the earlier we know about the impending homelessness, the better, because we can try and plan for the best type of accommodation. If you've got children taking their, you know, important exams, we'll try and keep them in the borough if we can. But without having any of our own stock, we're very limited, and we're very reliant on other sort of providers and their availability.
On that topic, there's the mention about the TA purchase. Is that, and it's being implemented? Is there any light on the horizon there of whatever the phrase is, of that actually coming through to help? Presuming that's to help relieve this sort of problems.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can sort of give you a bit of an update on the TA purchase scheme. So I think when the initial decision was taken sort of in January, the market was still quite buoyant. It's obviously slowed down a bit, and we've actually got probably about 8 properties currently on the table that we're looking to go through the purchase and legals. We've obviously got to do, we're still doing a bit of due diligence on those properties. So it does look like we are able to have some more local stock. Obviously, as we know, that does take other stock out of the wider housing market, but it again is a mechanism to help control our costs and control the sort of the quality element, and also most importantly be in our borough to provide that. So it is hopefully coming on stream fairly soon. I'm hoping that by January we will physically own some properties and have people in them.
I can't remember, what was there a time frame for the 50 properties that were mentioned, or is that just as soon as you can sort of thing?
I think it was as soon as you can, but I think on the cabinet paper it was 2 years. But I don't want to overpromise, but the way the market is currently, the person at the office, we've got a temporary officer supporting us with the work. He seemed quite optimistic that one a week, a new sort of proposal a week would probably be reasonable. So we may be able to get that done. But we've also had a bit of preparation time, and we also are due to have contract to go live around sort of the managing process of that as well. So there's some other sort of support and administration work that we need to do around that. But I'm hoping it will be a nice steady flow.
Thank you very much, Chair, and delighted that they're coming on. Hallelujah. I know how long it takes. I'm going to try with some good news, hopefully. So in terms of where we go with temporary accommodation, we all know you're not going to stop what's there. You've got to prevent what's coming in and try and move on what you've got. It's two very different problems, and how you deal with them, there are some elements that could be quite similar, and there's one that I don't see in here, which I think Maidstone are doing really, really well, which is worth considering. And that's a partnership with one of the housing associations for tenancy sustaining tenancy training and preparing for tenancy training. In Maidstone, it works with the housing association I work for. We go in once every 3 months with an income advisor and a tenancy advisor, and usually a senior manager, to a group of 30 or 40 referred homeless persons or those in temporary accommodation, and go through the rent first approach, and also how to make sure that your behaviour when you go into your new let, make sure you don't breach your tenancy agreement further down the road and end up back where you started. It's a bit of investment, but by and large, most of the housing associations will do that for us for nothing, because quite frankly, it means they're getting their rent in, and that's happy days there. So that can help in terms of both making sure that those who do move on don't end up back in the rough sleeping initiative, and those who are already in trouble have that tenancy sustainment brief and understand that actually rent does come first. One of the phrases that I often use, and I hate admitting it, particularly when we get into December, there will be a lot of people that say, I can't pay my rent this month because I need to buy Christmas gifts. And one of the phrases that gets used in the housing associations that time of year is, you cannot plug an Xbox into a cardboard box. And it's harsh, but for some people, that's the way you have to be. For others, it is a case of putting the arm around and going, look, this is what's available. I think we need to be better at signposting. And I think that's the same for all organisations, particularly amongst the housing associations and ourselves and Citizens Advice. We need to be looking at those that can help with those moving costs, because that is a prevention for many people. So the Society of St Vincent de Paul will fund white goods, furniture, moving costs for someone moving into their first home or moving into social housing. So we can refer there, and that's then again not costing us money, but it's giving us an opportunity to really make a difference for those people. In terms of the market, we're not going to change that market. It's going to have to come down at some point. We are going to have to work with a wider array of social housing providers, I think, in the longer term. I think we're going to have some difficulties. I hate saying it. I know Hyde are moving their repairs in-house in October. That first period of time, as you move repairs from contractors to in-house, invariably will lead to increased void times while you recruit all the staff. And there is a lack of staff in this area in those trades. So it shows again that housing links back to our education and our economic issues in Swale. We need to be making sure that those who we have in these properties are being put forward for some of those apprenticeship schemes with the housing associations, become the Sparky that goes around and fixes the properties, so we haven't got to wait so long for them. I know the staff do a huge amount of work, and that's why it is about how we take some of the pressure off our own staff, move it around to some of the volunteer groups that can support and offer that support, and also how do we prevent them being made homeless by their family. That's always going to be the hardest one. because actually we see it quite regularly. I'm going to lose my full entitlement to housing benefit because my 18-year-old son or daughter's got a proper job. I then can't afford the rent. So actually the right thing for me to do is to chuck them out so that I still get my housing benefit. They're now in our temporary accommodation. So it's how do we find a way to mitigate that? Is it through use of discretionary housing payments and matching what they pay? That would really devalue a finite resource quite quickly. Or do we use that DHP to make sure people stay in their homes when they're paying the spare bedroom subsidy? It's a real tricky balancing act that I know the officers spend day in, day out trying to get right. And 99 times out of 100, because there's always one at the end of the week where you're knacked and you can't. It happens. So how we move that forward is the question mark. I think we're doing the right things in terms of the working with the other housing, the other local councils to try and bring in this Kent-wide approach on those nightly let costs, because I know those are huge. Whether or not we can encourage a housing association to come in and do similar to Ashford Borough Council with Belgic Court, which is temporary accommodation under licence, where they do the training in-house, similar to what we do at the Quays and with Riverside. But we need more of that to try and alleviate some of our temporary accommodation costs, because actually I think Ashford are the only ones that are allowed to site in Belgic Court. It's conversations and partnership working. It's the only way we're going to get through it.
I probably didn't capture all of those points, but I think, you know, we are always looking to learn from others. I think we don't actually get a huge amount of evictions from our registered providers, which I think is really positive. And we know that about their sort of tenancy sustainment teams, and that, you know, we do work well with those. I think it's always difficult to capture in a paper some of the intricacies of the work that's gone on, but what we're trying to develop is some very close work with the voluntary sector on the cost of living work and how we use the household support funds and things like that. And I'm sure you all saw in your members' dispatch last week about some sort of outreach sessions that we're doing with the Health and Care Partnership. But again, Rox went and attended a couple of months ago, didn't you, the cost of living group to work with the voluntary sector around about the pressing issues of homelessness, because again, they're going to be seeing these people before we see those people, and how we can get that sort of support. So there is definitely stuff. We do have a few schemes, don't we, with Southern Housing, where we do get exclusive use. So obviously we do have some temporary accommodation with those, and there are some of those schemes in place that again we can utilise going forward. So I think we've probably got some stuff, as you mentioned there, in different guises, maybe not exactly the same as the others. There is always more we can do. I think, you know, if we had more hours in the day, there's always more that can be done. And I think there's lots of stuff that the team have identified that they want to improve that we haven't had an opportunity to get to yet, because we've obviously had to prioritise the things that we thought would have either the biggest impact, either financially or to the quality of the services that we're providing. So it's a really big juggling act, isn't it, in terms of that?
Yeah, can I just add? I mean, you obviously said about the parental evictions, which, as you know, we have a lot of, and we're, you know, and if as you said, the child turns 18 and goes out to work, so the housing benefit stops. As far as we're concerned, that 18-year-old has to contribute and make up that shortfall. So a lot of our work is kind of talking to the young person as well as the household and saying, you're not homeless. That is not a reason for you to come in and make a homeless application. You know, we can help you sort this, we can help you budget, but you're not coming in as homeless. So we're pushing back on those sorts of cases, you know, really all the time.
I've got Alistair, Tony, and then Dolly.
This is probably isn't a question for officers, but I was wondering whether the committee had a sort of role in lobbying when there are issues like the spare bedroom subsidy. Is that something that, you know, if there are issues like that that cause problems, is there a role for that sort of discussion with the officers to sort of prompt us about the things that do cause problems that are actually policy based, that, you know, to inform us about where things are problematic because of the policy? And that's something that is obviously clearly more political than operational, but sometimes we don't know those things.
Yeah, if I come back on that. So I think one of the things that on the sort of the bottom of our table is around lobbying, and one of the things that is a classic and quite divisive in an opinion as well sometimes is about local housing allowance rates, and about if you put them up, landlords will put their rents up and things like that. But the principle is that it's set at the 30th percentile of the local the local housing market, and therefore the bottom third of property should be affordable to residents that need to have housing benefit or universal credit. That's been frozen for a few years now, and obviously we've seen, as Rox mentioned earlier, the hike in rental prices. So I don't even know what the percentile, the true percentile is now, but it's definitely not 30%. It could be, you know, it's extremely low. So we are looking to do some collective lobbying around LHA rates, and also the 90% that we can only claim, when actually even if we could claim 100%, that would get rid of, you know, the predicted overspend for this year. That would wipe that out, and that's just a sort of a technical thing. So we are evidence gathering at the moment, and we've had some good meetings as Kent Housing Group, and I think DLUC and DWP are fully aware of the concerns around LHA. I think there's the Treasury obviously need a bit more convincing, as always, but you would expect that of everyone who's in charge of the finances. So we are at the moment evidence gathering around some of that and those local examples and trying to identify that. So I think once we've got that information, absolutely, I think that is to share, and looking at a strategy that we can put in place collectively to do that, not just as Swale, but as Kent, as the South East going forward.
Okay, now I was going to ask this question at the end, but Charlotte's just sort of started it, and that is the LHA, Local Housing Allowance. Are we all absolutely clear on what this really means in terms of me? Because Joe and Josephine out there think, oh, yeah, but you get housing benefit to pay your rent. Oh, really? Now, when it started, I don't know, say you were entitled, you know, the number of people in your home, 3-bed home. So we'll give you, Charlotte will then give all the details here. We'll give you £1,000 a month. No, it was a hell of a lot less. We'll give you £500 a month. Now, if you can find a 3-bed home for less than £500 a month, you can have the, you know, that difference is yours. That's fine. But that was the local housing allowance. I personally don't understand the 30th percentile, Charlotte, which is why you're going to explain all this. But they never changed this £500 a month. And obviously it was different if it was a 1-bed or 2-bed, blah, 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 blah. But they never actually, nothing ever went up with inflation. So, I mean, I know Jefferson Road, obviously it's in my patch, and I cannot believe what's now being charged, and where are people getting the money from? So if you are constantly having to pay the difference between, well, it was £850 and it's now £1,500, we'll say, where are you getting that difference from? You're entitled to housing benefit either because you're on such a low wage or because you're unemployed or a pensioner. You know, we haven't got a magic money tree in the garden. So, as I say, Charlotte can explain the 30th percentile of that, but it just, I don't know. I really somebody up there just does not understand, and they're not interested in understanding. And if we put you in temporary accommodation, we can only claim 90%. Are the landlords only going to charge us 90%? Is that what you're saying? Of course it isn't. So it's constantly our our budget is constantly going over and over. The government tells us this is our duty as a local council. Well, then give us the money to pay for it. All governments, you know, there's a lot of governments could have changed that and chose not to. But if you can just explain, I've tried a few words of one syllable, Charlotte. If you can do the rest on that 30th percentile thing, then I've got Tony and Dolly. Just a minute, Tony. Go on.
Yeah, so I think it was, I'm going to say 2012 off the top of my head. So it used to be average rents of the area, and it was based on the previous September going forward. So the housing benefit would be linked to the local housing market. So back in, I think it's 2012, it went down to the third, so the 30% mark of that. Then there was years of being frozen, and then back after the pandemic, it was rebased at the 30th percentile, the LHA rate, and again it's been frozen ever since. So even though every now and again that's the principle, as soon as it gets frozen, the gap thing. So just as a bit of an example, in terms of, we'll go with a 2-bed, and Swale in its entirety falls within 2 different LHA rates. So we've got the Medway and Swale bit, and we've obviously got the Canterbury. Oh yes, no, we've got 3. There's a little bit that goes in as well. So if I just say for a 2-bedroom in Medway and Swale, the 30th percentile rent for September 22 was £800. The LHA rate per week was £750. So that's a difference of £50 a week for people that are, if you're on full benefits, that you would need to find that money. So that's going to come out of your food budget and the other money that you've got to come. So it's that gap that is not sustainable over a long period of time. And that's kind of the same over, obviously, lots of the, you know, the different bedroom sizes. There are other areas, if you look at Tunbridge Wells, their gaps are clearly much bigger than ours. But it's just showing that it is a growing problem, and it's also not being kept up with the original principles of how the rents were set in the first place, I suppose. I think that's the concerning bit. If it was just kept at that policy principle, we know that the third cheapest properties in our area, we would be able to fund through LHA, and it's not as high as that anymore.
Thank you, Chair. Something that greatly does concern me, I'm dealing with an issue as we speak in my ward. Southern Housing is a company I'm always in touch with. In the last 12 months, there's been 2 3-bedroom properties in good condition where the residents have moved out for whatever reason. And I've been in touch with the regional manager of Southern Housing. I'm waiting on a reply. It appears that these properties, when they're becoming vacant, these housing associations are selling these properties. Now, what a situation we're in, where we've got housing list going up and up and up, and we've got all these decent properties being sold by the housing association and making it harder. Is there anything we can do about this?
We don't have any strong things we can do about it. Years ago, they used to have to consult us as a stock transfer authority. So not other housing associations, but Southern, as our stock transfer authority, would have had to get our consent around disposing of those assets. Now they just need to inform us that they've been disposed of or are going to be disposed of. That said, I think Councillor Harrison and Councillor Martin will be fully aware of this because they've been involved in these conversations. We do regularly meet with very senior people within Southern Housing, and it is a conversation that we regularly have. The response that we get is the costs to refurb the property to the standards, and I think it is important to note the standards that are required of social housing, which is a lot higher than a lot of other housing, is cost prohibitive to do, and therefore they make the decision to dispose. I'm not saying that we necessarily agree with that position, but that is certainly the feedback that we get. It will be an ongoing conversation that we have, because I think every affordable property is very valuable and we want to keep as many as possible.
I'm assuming you're waving at me. Can you hear me? I can't hear you, unfortunately. So I'm just going to ask my question. I do apologise, Chair. I should have given you this question before the meeting. On a recent visit to the Ukrainian hub that operates in the Sittingbourne area, I ran into some KCC officers that were talking about what a good job the government has done in providing like a bit of a required housing for local authorities for people who've taken part in the scheme that was set up to support Ukrainian families coming over. And my question is, have we taken as an authority full advantage for all of our visitors, not just Ukrainian, but we also have the Afghanistan resettlement scheme, which I don't know if is active at the moment. Have we taken full advantage as an authority of all of those little pots that appear to be out there for various schemes? I already know the answer, I would imagine, but because I can't hear you, I'll go back and listen to the answer on the meeting recording. Thank you.
So obviously we have accepted funding through the local authority housing fund towards Afghan resettlement and Ukraine resettlement for some permanent homes, and those schemes are round one. We are doing, we have some of those properties lined up and looking to be delivered. We have also been working with the Afghan resettlement scheme and have a few leasehold properties and worked with landlords to enable some resettlement there as well. And again, within our team, we've got a couple of people that are working really closely with the Ukrainian hub and looking at how we can support people to move out of sort of the host property. Unfortunately, we have had a few of the Ukraine families come through temporary accommodation, and so Rox's team have supported them. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add. Work.
Yeah, hopefully to give a bit of context around what Councillor Winkles was mentioning there, having sat on all three out of four sides of the table over the last few years, I remember how frustrating it was as a ward member and as a cabinet member and as a committee chair, going, there's stock that's being sold off, it's just not on. Sitting on the housing association side, you have to have a look at the EPC for that dwelling. 9 times out of 10, that's going to be E or a D to meet the good home standard, which all social housing has to meet now. It's got to be a minimum of a C, and that's going to move to being a B. Then take a look at the works that are required, which is on the EPC certificate for each dwelling, to get it up to that C and then to get it to a B. For a lot of them, they're not capable of getting to a B if they're old enough. To get them to a C, you are looking not just at loft insulation, cavity wall insulation, floor insulation. You're then starting to look at low energy light bulbs, changing the boilers, and then you're looking at potentially having to put photovoltaics on just to get the EPC rating to C. Now imagine what you're then going to have to do to get that up to a grade B on your energy efficiency. Nigh on impossible. And that's where the housing associations are looking when they're going, right, I cannot afford to put the investment into this property when I'm probably going to have to sell it in 3, 4, 5 years' time anyway, because it won't meet the good home standard anymore. The positive thing with the housing associations is that they have to take the money from that auction sale, because invariably it is an auction sale, and reinvest it in their services or providing more accommodation. The key for us is making sure that we get them to spend that money here, not in another district. Now, with Southern, that shouldn't be overly difficult in the medium term. It has been because they haven't been taking the 106 agreements as many others have. But as we see more developments coming forward, we should be seeing those housing associations investing in those developments, and we need to encourage them to not only recycle the funds from the sales and the money that they've already got allocated, but use some of their grant funding too. It's like everything in housing. It always takes years. And it's always a fine line between getting it right for now and getting it right for the long term. And I think that's sometimes the nuance that we miss.
Thank you, Ben. I didn't know that either. And just as an aside, the last time we had a meeting, I was invited to a meeting, was on the day that our dear Queen died. I think that's well over a year. Perhaps we could give them a nudge. Or tell them I'll need a meeting. Okay, now any other questions? It's very important that we all know as much as we can about this because it is a big issue and I think it's going to get worse. And that's nothing whatsoever to do with our staff are knocking themselves out trying to keep it down. So it is very important that we know. Alistair and then Chris.
Thank you. It's almost a question for Ben really on this one. With that, I mean, I can see the very good reasons why you are trying to get homes up to those sort of standards. Is there acknowledgement in government about the cost that needs to be needed for that? Because I mean that's again strikes me as a sort of lobbying issue that isn't commonly known, and that the more that it is commonly known, maybe the more pressure that could be put to meet those sort of things, because to do those sort of things will provide people with accommodation that they don't need to spend a fortune on energy on. So I can see the value of the direction, but it's a bit like the ULEZ. It's you've got to have that sort of extra push to actually make it affordable for the people who need to afford it, and that I'm afraid comes down to the funding that it is available. But so maybe I've answered the question just in saying that.
She'll try not to sway into the previous item. There is some grant funding that's made available, but as ever with anything from central government, it never covers the full cost. Let's take a look at damp and mould. We want to sort damp and mould out in properties. In a lot of cases, that's been caused by works previously done to make a building more energy efficient without understanding why it had the holes in the side in the first place, for ventilation and making sure you don't have damp and condensation staying in the property. That's going to cost a fortune. There's very little money coming from government for that. Fire safety, when you've got all the cladding on the buildings. Money from government, particularly if you've got leaseholders in there or shared owners in there. Good luck. And then in terms of meeting those environmental standards, there is a grant similar to the one that we could never get anyone to use. That might be the one, the winter warmth grant. Fairly similar in housing associations, but you've got to make a huge long list, and then they might say we'll pay for the top 25%. And then you've got to find the other money. So it's a long-term issue. And as I say, there's pressures on the housing associations, there's pressures on us, there's pressures on the individuals in the properties. So we'll get there, but there needs a lot of pressure on government, and I think a change in government with a bit of luck to get our LHA rates to a decent amount. It should be at the 50th percentile. It was a mistake having that lowered to the 30th percentile, frankly. It should be raising in line with inflation. But, lessons learned. We've got to move on and try and change things for the better going forward. And lobbying, I think, is where a lot of our power is going to sit.
Yeah, thank you. Mine's more a question out of ignorance, I suppose. How do we move people around from properties that they no longer use? For example, I know of a lady who was given a house that was all done out because she had a disabled son. That disabled son has now moved out, moved on and gone, but she is still in this specially adapted house that was done for her son. I don't understand why she's still in there. I mean, you hear of things like that as well.
Yeah, well, I could do this one because I was on the area panel for our local main housing association, which probably covered that. And I said, no, it wasn't I. It was our panel. So there was me and tenants. And we put forward that it shouldn't be this home for life. We should be offering tenants a home for life. For example, when like that, there was one, it could well be that one. There was one site where the housing association was being given, let's say, 10 properties, and they allocated one to be specifically disabled friendly. And I think whereas the 9 cost 100 grand each, the specially adapted one was going to be 200 grand, but it was really absolutely, you know, top notch for this person, for this, they had this family in mind. And I heard that, and I said to, when we discussed this as an area panel, we said, right, we think that this should be the policy, because you cannot spend double on every single housing association property just in case there is a severely handicapped person. Am I allowed to say that? I've said it. So it should be a home for life, not this home for life. This was the officers. I mean, this is your tenants telling you this. Okay, I was a local councillor, but your tenants were saying this is how it should be. This is what's fair. This is what's right. And they just, you know, didn't have the bottle to see it through. I'm not sure if I can say that online either, but that was the way it worked. And I still think that that's what they should be doing, because, you know, at one point I said, you know, we're going to have a big problem in my patch, because where I've had like 6, 8 people living in a home, kids have all vanished, and now there's just one parent left. We should have a process of talking to people about moving them on. Well, they can bid for a smaller property. I said, I'm not talking about bidding. I'm talking about you helping people move. You know, let's have a seamless process. You want people out of a 3-bed and into a nice 1-bed that they can manage, you're going to have to do it for them. And they left it till it was desperate when we had the bedroom tax. Do you remember when that came in? All housing associations suddenly went round to all these, you know, people that were left rattling around in a big house and, oh, you know, we could give you, do you want to move? We could pay for your carpets. We could pay for your removal. No, I'm quite happy here. No, don't wait till it's desperate. You should be doing it as an automatic policy. And these were the things that their own tenants were pushing forward to the main local housing association. Didn't want to know. That's not that we should not give in on it. We could just have another round, but those things were suggested over the years, and they just didn't have the stomach to pursue it. Let's put it like that. That's probably a bit Joe Blunt, Charlotte. She would have tied it up a lot nicer. Go on.
So if you look about what we can control, rather than, obviously we can't control what housing associations do, but within our housing allocations policy, you can get into Band A if you are under occupying a property, because we obviously want to prioritise people moving into the appropriate size accommodation. So obviously it is incentivised through the allocations policy. It is obviously something that we want to encourage, but we are reliant on how tenancies are managed and the encouragement. But some people have been in these homes a long time and it is their home. And I think that's the difficulty, that, you know, the reality of people having that tenancy, they do need to give up that tenancy and swap, and the way the legislation is currently is sort of difficult as well. So I think it is something that we have addressed with housing associations. Clearly, bedroom tax was a motivation to do quite a lot of work around it. And we just need to sort of encourage it, because we know, you know, in all housing sectors, not just the social housing sector, there is probably enough bedrooms in the country to resolve the housing issue. They're just all in the wrong place, in the wrong configurations. So it's one of those issues, unfortunately. But our housing allocations policy does, you know, obviously incentivise that.
Sorry, anyone else? That's how I think it's really important, as this is such a big subject that is going to keep coming up and up and up, that we are all, you know, and also you'll get questions in your wards. Usually not the right ones, but you know, if you've got enough information to actually explain, well, no, actually, that's not what happens. This is what happens, and then that's it. It's not, you know, we're not. This is a policy. Most of it comes from the government, and this is the way it is. Our staff are knocking themselves out to try and do the absolute best by the people in this borough. Is there any lobbying that we can help with? I know you've got the Kent Housing Group.
I don't think so at the moment. I think if we do come across elements, we will obviously let you know. But equally, it's, I suppose, understanding we can see it from one point of view. If members hear other things, and there sometimes is a misunderstanding of casework. Sometimes we'll have one story, you'll get a different story. There's probably another story as well, and somewhere in the mix of that is obviously the accurate position. But do speak to sort of Rox and the team to get clarity on that. There is a bit of a misunderstanding around sometimes the criteria that goes into banding on the housing allocations policy. Everyone, I think, feels that they should be in a higher band than they're on. So it's just, there's elements of those, and I think it's just to, if we can work collectively together on that casework, we can obviously, you know, sometimes you might have information that we haven't, because they haven't passed that on when they've had their interview or the phone call. And equally, there might be other circumstances where we've got some additional information that hasn't been passed on. So I think it's just there, we can collectively work together to resolve these issues, and just to get people to get help at the earliest stage, really, because the earlier we can work with people, the quicker, you know, the more likely the team can support them and potentially prevent the homelessness.
I just wanted to remind everyone as well that on an average year, we only have about 300 properties that are available to be let, and that includes, you know, the older persons, the sheltered, traditional shelter type homes. So it's very limited. We've got plenty more people that want those properties. And to sort of put it into context, as of today, we've got 326 families in temporary accommodation. So even if they were allocated all of those properties, it still wouldn't sort of resolve the problem.
And that is not taking account of the 2,000 people who are sitting on the housing register. So if you're on the housing register, you know, basically might never get anywhere if getting 300, those sorts of numbers. Han?
Thanks. I was wondering, how reflective of needs do you think the numbers on the housing register are? Just because I know loads of people don't apply for it because they don't think there's any point. And does that impact us as a borough in being able to fully demonstrate the need within the borough?
I personally don't think it does demonstrate the need. The certain criteria. So if you're seen as being adequately housed, so if you're living in the private rented sector in a 3-bed property and you've got 4 children, you've probably got enough bedrooms, but what it doesn't take into account is your rent has rocketed. So there's at the moment there's no criteria for that. But then again, you know, if we were to increase that, we are potentially increasing people's hopes, because, as I said, there's only 300 properties each year, but it certainly doesn't reflect the need. No.
And just to add to that, obviously through planning policy, more importantly, and the strategic housing needs assessment that's done as evidence based for that. Again, it's when you sort of compare the housing register information, sometimes, again, if people aren't applying, we try to make them informed of that and the deprivation factors and everything else. It's really difficult to capture the real life, I suppose, within some of those policy documents. And we could always do with more affordable housing, I think is fair to say.
And of course, those people who've been invited to breakfast with the MP, they could raise it there, couldn't they? I haven't done any emails, so I might well have an invite. If I haven't, I should be asking why. Right. Okay, then. So discuss, scrutinise, and note the current mitigation in place. We've had a good discussion. Hopefully, we're all as au fait as we can be. It's just never-ending nightmare, isn't it? Really. But just thank the officers for not just for coming tonight and presenting the report, but basically all the hard work that you and your teams do to help our residents in the borough. If there is any more that we can do, you just shout. Okay, members, noted that? Good, good, good. Right then, that's the end of that. So, end of the business for tonight. Declare the meeting closed at 8:21. Oh, 09.